was just kind of frustrated with the whole situation. And when I tried to express my feelings about it, maybe I could have gone about it in a better way. But then, yeah, it just kind of blew up from there. And, you know, things were said that you can't unsay, and that was it. You know, from that point on, I just thought of it as a completely new project, totally different perspective. And moving forward, I mean, we didn't really pay much attention to, the arrangements we had before, and a lot of any of the pre-production type things that had been talked about before. We just kind of started all over again.
I imagine that things can get really heated just generally in the process of making a record, because it's obviously the songs and the situation and the band are things that you feel intensely passionate about.
Well, yeah. And, we, I started writing this stuff in January of 21. And, the thing that I heard a lot was, let's don't get in a hurry. Let's don't rush anything. Let's just don't get in a hurry. And so we didn't get in a hurry. And
that was coming from the band or the producer?
Well, really, I mean, that was before the producer got involved. And so, we really did take our time. Like I've said this elsewhere, but, from the sitting in the garage in the middle of the night writing songs phase to the actual, production, I probably spent more time thinking about this bunch of songs than I have any other, in 30 years of doing this. So it took a really long time to move forward to the point where we could take some of them into the studio. And even at that point, after about 6 months' time, we only had 2 songs finished. So, it just, like I said, I just got pretty frustrated with the whole situation. And, it's unfortunate. I think, a lot of it was just kind of due to a misunderstanding. But unfortunately, that's the way things happen sometimes. I mean, obviously, I just played 2 shows with Superdrag like a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, as far as the 4 of us, things are fine between us. But the record just didn't work out the way we planned. And, I'd like to think we will make a new record. It just won't be this record.
What was behind that initial, I guess, push to not, again, to take your time? Was it, hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we've got all the time in the world, we might as well really work on this thing?
Well, I think in the past, there were times when I was in more of a hurry to make things happen than anybody else. And maybe I kind of forced things, there are times when you can like try too hard and force things to happen. And sometimes you end up taking the fun out of it, and I certainly, agreed with that from that point of view. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to do that at all. Just thinking back, there was a record we made called Industry Giants quite a few years ago. And I mean, I can remember the day after Christmas, like talking to either the guy that was mixing the record or the guy that was mastering the record, like trying to get it finished, and that was kind of like a guerrilla effort where we went in and out of a bunch of different studios as opportunity presented itself, and we would like show up, with no rehearsal whatsoever and just work up the songs right there on the spot and do as much as we could, like in 48 hours, we did that I guess 6 or 7 times and ended up with the record. But to me, it kind of sounds like a record that was made in a bunch of different studios under a bunch of different recording scenarios. Um, so I guess that might be one instance where if we had taken our time a little more, maybe the result would have been different. I don't know. But in this case, I think it was just because we hadn't done anything in a really long time. Before we started working on this music, we hadn't really done anything since 2010. And I guess maybe, part of it was just kind of wanting to ease into things and not, not go in the studio next week and try to record, I mean, that makes sense to me, looking at it that way. But we certainly did not rush anything on this one.
Well, yeah, to the point, it sounds like you almost perhaps shot yourself in the foot a bit.
Well, you could say that. I definitely could argue.
It ended well, right? I mean, the record came out, but I guess maybe there's a lesson to be learned that either end of the extreme in terms of the amount of time that you take on something they're both double-edged swords.
Yeah, I agree.
Your sense on that last, I guess, what to date is the last Superdrag record is, it sounds like you're getting at that it sort of suffered, that it was almost pieced together, but it was also just, you felt like you didn't take or have enough time with those songs.
Well, maybe not. I mean, we didn't have the benefit of ever having played any of the songs live, which is always to your advantage, when it comes time to record, or even just having the opportunity to rehearse. Yeah, I mean, it was unlike any of the other records, for better or worse.
Given the fact that it was started in 2021 and, there certainly wasn't a lot of touring happening back then, it would have been difficult even under perfect circumstances to have actually gone out in front of a crowd and played these songs.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, from the get-go, I mean, it was just, I never looked at it as the gateway to like going out and doing tours again, because that's just not possible for us. Not right now anyway. So yeah, I mean, the whole idea was just to get together and make a great record. And there were things I liked about, what was happening in the studio, even to the limited amount of work that we were able to do. I mean, it's not that I didn't like the sounds or the playing or anything else. It was just drug on and on. And I guess I just got a little bit frustrated with it. And like I said, I could have been maybe a little more diplomatic in the way I went about trying to talk to people about it. But, things were, I guess it's true what they say about email. It's just sometimes it can be completely misunderstood, or, it can end up being taken in ways that you never intended. And, things just sort of disintegrated from there.
I mean, I'm saying this to you as we're doing this over Zoom right now with the cameras turned off, but obviously you lose something when you're not in the room with somebody, when you can't see their voice, when you can't hear them. And I think that applies to both email and, to a certain extent, making music.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, it's on one hand, it was an unfortunate way for things to sort of unravel, but I really couldn't be more pleased with the record that we did end up with. Uh, and I think, taking uh, that second effort and sort of that taking another approach to the whole thing. I really like the way things changed, because almost all the songs changed pretty drastically. Um, the big thing was just trying to make them all shorter. They all got faster and they all got shorter, and you know any superfluous bars were removed. Any spot in the song where you're kind of hanging around just waiting for the next idea to happen, like we eliminated all that. And I credit Stuart Pack, the producer, a lot with that. uh, you know he brought a lot to it in terms of the arrangements, and you know his son was doing the engineering and also playing drums, so the two of them together, you know uh, we probably didn't spend more than an hour playing any of them before we started going for drums. So I mean it was radically different, but they play together so well. And uh, Stewart had, like, I think I said this somewhere before, but he did more pre-production in an hour and a half than the other guy did 6 months. um, and he sort of treated these songs like they were his, and as a result, I think we ended up with a record that I personally like better than the one we started making before.
Trimming all the fat was almost a reaction to maybe the frustration around the amount of time that it took to put out there. So once you're actually back in the process of doing the record again, you strip it down as much as possible and in a sense get things on tape as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we there for a while, we were working on every Tuesday and Thursday. We'd get together for like 3 or 4 hours and do, either work on arranging one and putting down the drums, or else, doing vocals or guitar or whatever. But there really was an absolute minimum of overdubs across the whole thing. I mean, there are definitely a handful that make it sound, a little more recordy, but by and large, I mean, it's just guitar, bass, and drums. Uh, you know, I wouldn't compare it to the Ramones, but I was definitely inspired by, the Spartanness of the first Ramones LP, where you don't really hear anything that you wouldn't see on stage. And that was definitely inspirational.
Lyrically, though, or thematically, the songs largely stayed intact.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't really think any of the lyrics changed. It's just the sort of the approach to playing them.
I'm curious what that experience is like from the standpoint. I mean, obviously, over your long career, you've had opportunities, and I've even, listened to you discuss this in interviews about sort of revisiting some of the old records and, maybe kind of coming to peace with some of the flaws you'd seen in them. But this is an interesting instance where, these songs being written at a very specific time, at a very, I'm speaking for myself, but I think I'm speaking for a lot of people when I say like just a very dark time, that they were a product of that. So coming back around, a year or two later and revisiting them and getting that glimpse into the you of 2021, what was that experience like?
Oh, it was tough. It was tough. I mean, struggling with depression is definitely one of the primary, themes of this album, without a doubt. And I don't know, it's kind of tough, to stare down that black hole and like know quite what to say about it. um, but even taking the most unpleasant things in life and using them as like a springboard to create something new, I think that always helps. And I just tried to be as honest as possible, with the writing, and I just think that's always the best way.
Specifically with this set of songs, how did that honesty manifest itself?
Well, I mean, I was having a lot of insomnia at the time, and it was a lot of sitting in the garage in the middle of the night, uh, just trying not to wake anybody up. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, the method for writing songs for me really has never changed in 30 years. Uh, you know, just find, even if it's like 2 bars or 4 bars, just find some kind of a musical thing that's worth playing again and again, and just play it again and again until a melody kind of suggests itself. And then the first thing that comes to mind is what I start singing.
I've certainly dealt with depression and certainly dealt with depression during the pandemic, but I've also had insomnia at various points in my life. And I think that I'm sure people have talked about this. I haven't really heard it articulated. But one of the things I think that doesn't get discussed a lot about insomnia is how lonely it is. Especially in a weird way, especially if you're in a house with other people and you're just the only one awake and around.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's very lonely.
Writing this in the middle of the night, it was kind of like a dark time on top of another dark time, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But there are some songs on the record that are a lot more lighthearted. Well, maybe not a lot more. Some of them are a lot more lighthearted. But I guess it's just kind of a real picture of life at the time. I mean, you know, there there aren't a lot of great songs written about how things are just so. Not that I'm aware of.
Obviously, this starts. We start kind of heading down the path of cliche with this, but a lot is made about people using um, whatever form of creativity as an outlet for whatever they're dealing with at the time. Do you feel that for you that songwriting has become an even more essential part of that process as you've gotten older?
Well, yeah, I mean it's just been such a big part of my life for such a long time. I I mean, I definitely have. There definitely have been times when I wanted to take all my gear and throw it in the river and never see it again. Um, but no, I mean, I'm a lifer until the ideas run out, and thankfully they haven't run out yet.
What are some of those moments where you wanted to chuck all the gear in a body of water?
Well, it's just it can really break your heart sometimes, or sometimes it's like every time you make a record, it ends up breaking your heart. Uh, because you pour your whole mind and soul in there, and we did several albums with Elisa Memory, and I felt like each one was better than the last, you know, but it's just hard. Sometimes it's just hard to find an audience, and it's, the, well, I was just going to say the main object, is to reach as many people as possible and have as many ears as possible uh, on it, whatever it is. And also, I lived in Nashville for a long time, and it's kind of in some ways, I mean, it's kind of a weird place to try to do music.
Somewhat ironic, I think.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's and on the one hand, I mean, you can't throw a brick without hitting a musician, but maybe that's part of the problem. But yeah, I lived there for 18 years. There's, I mean, I have friends there that I miss, but that's about it.
Why was Nashville a difficult place for you to make music?
Well, I don't think it's not a difficult place to make music. I mean, there are plenty of facilities, and I mean, we got to work at some really cool studios. I think it's just hard to get anybody to pay attention.
There's so much noise.
Yeah, there's so much happening. I mean, when I first got there, it was like 2002, but it changed so much in the interim. Those 18 years. I mean, it was just like a completely different world. Uh, but in spite of that, I mean, it really, when it comes down to actually making records and writing songs and everything, I mean, it really makes no difference what their ultimate fate will be. It doesn't change anything as far as the actual process of making the art, whether business is good or bad or whatever. The thing that pleased me the most about the Lisa Memory thing is that it always sustained itself, and we never had to risk anything. It always, we did one record where we had some label help, and then we did a couple of cycles that were just completely full DIY, 100%. And with the cream from that, we were able to make our fourth record, Moonshot. And on day one, we had the money there to make it. So that was cool.
You have probably about as much as anybody, you've been through the ringer when it comes to working with labels, and you've seen how I'm always, it's always really interesting to me to talk to bands that were around specifically in the 90s for that moment, that almost, in a sense, that kind of, that last, not only was it a last gasp of the record industry, but there was it seemed like because of that there was a lot of flailing happening. There was a lot of money being pumped into things, and a lot of folks ended up getting a lot of support because of that. You had a nice couple of records there, but it sounds like they effectively left you high and dry. I think, what was it, the third album?
Yeah, that was that was the hill worth dying on, basically. And I don't regret the way that all went down. I mean, if anything, I take pride in the fact that, we were just unwilling to change anything about it to please this person that obviously really didn't give a fuck, at the end of the day. But, I can't really say that we did much of anything to make their jobs easier. I mean, honestly, in hindsight, they turned us loose to make that second record, and I mean, we sat in Sound City for 3 months, which seems like pretty self indulgent looking back at it now. But I mean, that's just the way we did it. I mean, we made the record on tape. There was no Pro Tools, no editing. Yeah, I mean, I think he cut tape a couple of times, but there was no, you know, we had that was one of the reasons why we ended up making that record with Jerry Finn, because he was actually willing to do it without using Pro Tools. And everybody else that we talked to, thought we were crazy. And, after, having made records in Pro Tools and kind of learning, I mean, ultimately it's just a recorder. You don't have to snap everything to a grid and fix everything and tune everything. You don't have to do it. You can just record. But at the time, yeah, we just kind of, we felt strongly about making the record 100% analog until they pressed it on CD. And so, that was a real luxury to get to work in a studio like that for that long and do things the way we did. We had one of the things that I think is interesting about that record is that, the normal conventional approach is like, get a great sounding drum kit, mic it up, and knock out all the drums. Then go and put down all the guitar ones or whatever, then all the bass. But on that one, we had 5 different kits that could be, sort of combined in any way that we saw fit, and started each song sort of built from the ground up, rather than it's kind of that conveyor belt approach. So I think as a result of that, each song kind of has its own atmosphere. And that's one of the things that I think is interesting about that record. Basically we didn't end up making a video. We talked about it for, a couple of months with the director and made, treatments and budgets and everything. And then it was just decided, yeah, no, we're not going to do that.
I'm sure the label loved that.
Well, no, I mean, it was their decision not to do it.
Oh, so, really?
Yeah. Somebody else got that budget to make their video, and so really that was the difference, between the first album and the second album. But granted, I mean, it didn't sound like anything else that was happening on the radio in 1998. I mean, that was the advent of all this sort of like rap rock and
Woodstock 99 and
right. I mean, and we had nothing to do with that. So the fact that it wasn't successful commercially really doesn't come as that much of a shock. But it was definitely a downer to have the tour support cut short, basically, after about 6 months, that was it. That was about all the time they were willing to spend trying to promote it at all. And so the advice that we got at the time was just to go home and write a new album. And so that's what we did. And that ended up being that third album. And, I ended up writing 30 something songs. They didn't like any of them. Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I don't really know what they were looking for from us. They never could explain what it was that the songs were lacking, but anyway, long story short, I'm proud of the fact that we left it just like it was, and we finished it just the way we wanted it to be. And, I think a good many Superdrag fans would probably agree it's their favorite album. It's my favorite. So for what my opinions were.
He used the phrase "a hill worth dying on," specifically about how that ended up, and I think in a sense you're saying that to kind of maybe contrast or compare to the way things shook out with the latest record. But I, as I get older, um, it's become more and more clear to me that a really big and important part of growing up and maturing is sort of re-examining some of, in therapy they call them core beliefs, but re-examining these things that for whatever reason that you adhered to, and realizing that to a certain extent maybe some of those decisions that we make when we're younger can be completely arbitrary.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely. I mean, we spent a long time trying to please them, and just kept writing and kept writing and kept writing. At one point, they wanted me to go and write a song with Adam Schlesinger, which I did because, I mean, obviously I had a ton of respect for Adam Schlesinger. And
I mean, as far as like things that the label is making you do, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I had a great time. I'm really sad that he's not with us anymore. But yeah, he was nice as could be, and just literally just showed up on his doorstep, and I started playing him some of my 4-track stuff, and he was like, "Man, what do they want me to do with this? These are kick-ass finished songs." So we did end up writing a song, and they didn't like that either. But it's not like we just flatly refuse to make an effort, to get along. Because I mean, we wanted our record to come out, man. We wanted it to come out like it was supposed to, and we wanted to go back on tour. But it sort of for me, it got really personal. And the A&R guy said something to me that insulted me so deeply that I never wanted to speak to him again, and I never did. I never spoke to him again. I still haven't. But
are you able to repeat that, or is that just too?
Oh no, he quoted me some of the lyrics to one of the songs. It was like, you know what, man, nobody cares about that.
Oh, good.
I had just gone through like probably one of the roughest like periods of my entire life with losing a family member, and that was his way of I don't know, maybe I don't know if that was supposed to help me, or I really don't know, but I just, at that point, it just got really personal, and maybe for him it wasn't personal. But yeah, I mean, I can't, that root of bitterness, I had that wrapped around my heart for like 20 years. It took that long for me to wise up and, rip it out of there and just forgive him.
Talking of double-edged swords, I mean, that's maybe the downside to being so personal on an album, is that it becomes a piece of you, and that if somebody says something like that to you, or maybe if it could even be something silly, like maybe it's a bad review, or the album didn't get, the kind of reaction that you were hoping for, then it in a sense, it feels like a personal attack, because it kind of is.
Right. Well, that record, probably more so than any other. And for, at least, for me, and it was just a really hard time for us in general after, what happened with the second record, and, Tom quit the band. It just kind of seemed like everything was coming unglued. But in the midst of that, trying to keep this songwriting process going and you know, trying to come up with whatever it is they thought we were missing. But, it was just a lot of, like I remember one time the guy told me, he needed something that was going to reach him emotionally.
Him specifically.
Yeah. And, I was like, I don't know, man. I mean, this song here is about, being a pallbearer at somebody's funeral. How much more emotional do you need it to be? You really can't be more emotional. So it was just a lot of foolishness. It would have helped maybe for him to say, can you just sound like Green Day or, can you just sound like
Just tell me what you want.
Limp Bizkit or whoever. But yeah, I mean, all that being said, we all we could do was be us, and they signed us, and that's what they got. And ultimately it just didn't work out for that third record. But we had a good friend that ran a label, Arena Rock Recording, and the very first record he ever put out was a Superdrag 7-inch. So that was the only call we made, to try to. All we wanted to do was find somebody to help us put the record out and get us on the road. And that's pretty much what happened. So I would much rather, be sitting here today talking about the way that whole thing happened, rather than saying, well, yeah, man, I went in the A&R guy's office and begged and pleaded for mercy, and, told him he could just write the record and we'd be his minstrels, or whatever. I mean, imagine having to live that down, and it probably wouldn't have mattered anyway.
Yeah, so much of it is just luck and timing, and it strikes me though, looking at your career and some of the personal things that you've been very upfront about, both on record and in interviews, but it seems like so much of your evolution, sort of personally and musically, is about learning how to have a healthy relationship with your work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think maybe I figured it out. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, this record, Jinx, once it finally got in gear, the way it ended up, I mean, it was an absolute joy to make. And maybe one plus to spending that much time thinking about each song is that each one is exactly like it I think it should be.
Yeah, how often can you say that in life, right?
Well, not so often. So it was, I guess in one way that was an asset. Um, and yeah, I love how simple a lot of the songs are, and I love how Spartan it is in places. And it took a kind of I don't know, a lot of twists and turns to get from the garage to, what you hear on record. But I'm really psyched about the way it turned out.
Part of what I'm kind of getting at when I mentioned having a healthy relationship is, for like, obviously just being young and being in a touring band, so much of that is playing at clubs and bars, and so much of that revolves around alcohol. I mean, that's one facet of it, that journey that you've been on. But also, it sounds like over the past, maybe several years, or like maybe since the band's got back together again, is learning to play music and be in a band in a way that doesn't just sort of completely consume your life and isn't to the detriment of other parts of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, I don't know that definitely describes us, for a long, long time. Uh, we just ate, slept, and breathed Superdrag, 24/7. It was never, if if we were if we were off the road, we were riding. I mean, we had a drum kit in our kitchen and the 4-track on the stove, and we worked on songs every day, uh, and yeah, I mean, the world does get pretty small, you know. Sometimes, yeah, like it's just all about the people in the van, getting to the next show, getting it on, like getting it done, and then it's yeah. I mean, you do tune out a lot of things, and a lot of things, you miss out on a lot of things, a lot of birthdays and holidays, and time that you can't get back. It's there's definitely a lot has to be sacrificed, but that's just the nature of it, I guess.
Something I've always been curious about, and that I don't think heard you talk a lot about, certainly not recently. And I'm not entirely sure how this sort of fits into the whole picture for you, but you put out a solo album of effectively religious songs, and that was a really important part of your life for that period. I mean, what role did that play in all of these things that we're talking about?
Well, I had a pretty dramatic experience of sort of meeting God in a way that I really never had. And I mean, I grew up in church, was baptized twice in case it didn't work the first time.
Didn't take.
Um, like a lot of Baptists. But it was uh, it was such a radical experience and was so mind blowing. Uh, just kind of changed my relationship to everything. Um, but I mean, the probably the most important part of it was that, from that moment forward, I mean, that was November 11th of 2001. I haven't had a drop to drink since. And the only way that I can make sense of that is to give God the credit, because I had no intentions of making that change. Um, and that all happened in the middle of we were in the middle of recording Last Call for Vitriol. And, I had to take a couple of weeks off, and, I had to, whether it's whether it's a miracle or not, your body has to go through some things when you just pull the emergency brake like that and just stop drinking. Uh, so, I mean, there's definitely periods of time I really don't remember uh, in those days. But anyway, we ended up finishing that record, and we had commitments to go out and promote it on tour, which we did. And that was pretty difficult starting out.
Being the sober guy in the room.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty weird. It was tough.
I stopped drinking about 5.5 years ago, and these two things aren't comparable, but maybe there's sort of a little bit of truth in this for you. As I remember, I'm a big fan of karaoke, and I remember it was so hard for me to go up and sing in front of people the first several times because I didn't have a little bit of that, artificial courage in my system.
Well, for me, it was, you can get to a point where there, when you're on stage hammered, and that's just the way you're used to being. Um, there's about a 3 foot perimeter, and everything beyond that's just a blur. You know, so you don't really notice people looking at you, or you're just kind of, I don't know, in your own little space, and didn't have that anymore. Um, you know, but I spent a long time, that in there was a church in Nashville that we went to for a long time, and it was great there. Loved it there, but things happened and things changed, and I really haven't been involved with a church in quite a while. But I mean, my faith remains. You know, uh, the church itself, I don't know, with a capital C, like or at least the political arm of it, kind of lost me a while ago. For reasons that are probably pretty obvious. Um, it's really weird when those two things mix and they're pretty much one and the same. Uh, but I think like everything else, it's just something that I've tried to express and deal with, in writing songs. I mean, those first couple of records of mine, for sure, the solo records. This one, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really deal with the gospel. I mean, it wasn't really a conscious choice or anything. It's just the way the songs turned out. But the most recent thing that I pressed up on vinyl and put out, was a bunch of my 4-track stuff, and a lot of it was sort of gospel oriented, and I wanted to dedicate that to my dad because he passed away last spring, after a long illness. And so I enjoyed putting that together, for that reason. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I feel like I could spend a long time answering that question.
And in a certain sense, music can play this role too, but life's hard, man. And like the world is a scary place. And if you found a source of comfort in all that, like, by all means, like, hold on to that with your life.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was, like I said earlier, the experience I had that night was so powerful. There would be no way for me not to believe. I mean, it made me a believer. And yeah, it wasn't, I didn't hear a voice, but I kind of felt the voice. And I guess you could say it was the Holy Spirit saying, do you love me or do you hate me? And at that moment, it just seemed like a choice between life and death.
If you're talking about alcoholism, it absolutely was, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my skin was yellow, like my body was in bad shape. Uh, and the sad thing was I felt like that was part of my job, to die young. I mean, that's one of the sickest, distortion of truth that has claimed a lot of people that should have lived a hell of a lot longer and done a lot more than they did. Just this notion of that somehow self-destruction and rock and roll are the same thing. But really, rock and roll to me is about freedom. It's a synonym for freedom. And really, climbing in a bottle every night of your life, I wouldn't say it is all that liberating. It's kind of like a prison, in itself. So I'm really glad that I was delivered from that, because like I said, I really didn't have any intentions of changing anything. I was just going to ride it out till the end. So to be sitting here talking to you now at age 50, something I never thought I would do.